Birthday, Fred.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you.
Today being the 22nd of May of 2020, it's Wagner's birthday, but we're not going to talk too much about Wagner. I'm aware that I was supposed to be in Milan tonight. I'm in New York, you're in Vienna, because I was supposed to hear you perform tomorrow in Italo de Medici's L'amore dei tre re. And that's, I think, the only role of yours I've not seen you do. And it was to be at La Scala. And so this will be for another time. But to those few of you listening around the world who do not know Ferruccio Furlanetto, I don't name my favorites. So I'm not going to say that he's one of my favorites, but let's put it this way. He is my mother's favorite opera singer, and my mother knows what she's talking about. So we'll leave it at that. And Ferruccio, as you know, we talk a fair amount on IDAGIO about inspiration. And I wanted to first ask you about a teacher of yours who I met, Ettore Campogalliani, who also trained Tebaldi and Pavarotti and Freni and many other fine Italian artists. What was his specialty? What was his approach in terms of teaching and inspiration?
I think that his specialty, I mean, the real special thing that he was giving us was what we call in Italian la linea di canto, the line of singing, the development of the phrase from A to Z, how to breathe through the phrase. And of course, this applied to the basically to the Italian repertoire, but then it's good for whatever repertoire. And he was sensational because it was my first and only teacher. When I went there, I was just coming from my short adventure in pop at that time. And he taught me from the very first breathing exercise to, I would say, for good 4 years, I was going to Mantova, basically 2 or 3 times per week, which is a trip. And then after 4 years, he came. In the meantime, I had my debut. And he came after 4 years to my very first Don Giovanni in Treviso. I was having this debut at that time, which was rather unusual for a young singer to do Don Giovanni at 26. And I won the competition where the competition was based on Don Giovanni. I was participating for the role of Don Giovanni. I won, and I had a chance to have my debut. And Campogalliani came, and I remember that after the performance, he came to me and he told me, from now on, you don't need me anymore. The real teacher is yourself. And it was amazing. Then, of course, I kept going to him less frequently than before, but because I was, in the meantime, starting to be busy. But I will never forget these words because are extremely true. Because when a singer finds his way and he starts to do the proper repertoire, the only one who can really decide whether you're doing well or not, whether the repertoire that you are doing is the right one for you, if it makes you tired or not, is only you. And it was a blessing, really. And I spoke with all my great colleagues, Pavarotti and company, and they say the same thing.
But all of you who I just named, Freni, Pavarotti, Tebaldi, I think also Leonucci, Ruggero Raimondi, all have wonderful facility with the Italian language, not because you're native speakers, but because there's something about the way all of you particular artists connect to the language, number one, the meaning, but number two, the sound of the words as they connect to the music.
I remember that Campogalliani from the very beginning told me, yes, okay, the vocalize is right, is correct, but let's go on, because now to this vocalize, we must apply the word. And the word is the most fundamental vehicle to get to the heart, to the people. Of course, together with the color of your voice, with your intentions. But the word is a privilege. And at that same time, I started to do a lot of Mozart where the word is more than fundamental, because based also the character is based in the recitatives. And in the recitatives, you must be clear. You must really live what you're saying. And I was lucky, I mean, to start from the very, very beginning with the right foot and with the right people. He was an extraordinary pianist, by the way, because the dynamic of a phrase, it could have been extremely clear just in the way he was playing it, to make you hear what he was intending. And yeah, great.
So another thing you and I have in common, apart from May birthdays and a lot of other things, is the Italian region of Friuli Venezia Giulia. This is the northeasternmost region of Italy. You are from there, from the town of Sacile, in the province of Pordenone, which is relatively near Venice. I'm not from there, but I have a very deep relationship with the region for many reasons, but two of them particularly. One of them was my mentor and teacher when I worked at La Scala was Giorgio Strehler, and he was in Trieste. And he's the one who introduced me to that whole world of Trieste and its culture. But also when I was a student in Bologna, specifically May 5th of 1976, just before my 20th birthday, there was a terrible earthquake in Friuli, in Venzone and Gemona. And I decided to go up to that area, I'd never been, to see if I could help, because 10 years before, 1966, many Americans living in Florence helped clean up after the floods in November of 1966. And I stayed a month in Venzone and Gemona, in these towns that had been completely destroyed. And the people were so hospitable and so eager to feed me and help me. And I said, no, I came to help you. And it formed a very deep bond, and I'll make a long, long story short. So that 25 years later, when 9/11 happened in New York City, and there was a big article in the Messaggero Veneto, the newspaper, it listed everything that happened, and then in small print it said, "E salvo Fred Plotkin, Fred Plotkin is safe." And people from the region got in touch and said, how can we help you? You helped us 25 years ago. There's an expression in Friulano, and correct my pronunciation, El Friul non se desmenta, Friuli does not forget.
Really?
And they donated wine, the grapes to make wine, harvested on September 11th of 2001. And it was called Tokai Friuli, New York. And we raised more than $1 million to help relief efforts here. Right. So I love your region. What is particular about it to you, even in the larger context of Italy? And I'll just add, it's between Venice and Vienna, as you are.
Well, Friuli is a very special corner of the world, as you said. And I still think that the last image that I would like to have in my eyes one day will be the profile of my mountains, because that is really in my genes, in my life, and it's so special. And the people, I mean, they are big workers, few words. I remember that most of them were working abroad at that time, and they stayed there just to earn the money necessary to come back and rebuild their houses exactly where they were, because it's a matter of roots, but very, very deep roots. And then we have, as you mentioned, some blessing with the wine and the food. And it's a very, I feel very Friulano, I must say, also as a character.
What is a Friulano character?
It's a bit closed, not many words, as I said, very determined workers. and knowing that, first of all, you must ask from yourself to achieve certain things and not to expect them from that other people will do that for you. So I feel that way.
The Friulians have an expression which is a bit humorous, mal di maton, which means brick sickness.
Yep.
In other words, this great desire to start building.
Yep.
And I remember in the churches in Gemona and Benzone that all the rubble, all the rocks were on the ground, and they started writing numbers on them as they rebuilt the church. And I said, why are you writing numbers on them? And they said, so when the church comes down again in the next earthquake, we'll be able to put it back together faster.
Amazing. I didn't know that.
Well, another time you and I will just sit and talk about Friuli Venezia.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk to you about music some more.
Yeah.
You told me that one of your great inspirations, certainly understandable, was Herbert von Karajan. And I know that a couple of the pieces that you offered on Idagio for the listeners to listen to were conducted by Karajan. One of them included you, the other one did not include you. Mm-hmm. One of them is the Mozart Coronation Mass, and the other is Verdi's Requiem. Tell me about these.
Well, the Coronation Mass was an amazing adventure because Karajan always said to us when we were rehearsing, the year before we were rehearsing for the recording of Don Giovanni, where I was doing my first Leporello that we would have done in 2 years at the Easter Festival. And he said, my dream was always to be a Kapellmeister during a religious ceremony in Vatican. And voila, it happened. And the Pope was with you, and fantastic, group of singers. My adored friend, Gösta Rimberg, we played golf and tennis, and we were eating, and Katie Battle, and Voice from Heaven, through the Lisa Schmidt. It was sensational to be there on the corner, on the side of the major altar, and on the left side of the Pope, and to be just 1 meter from Karajan, and to see he was already suffering, and you could see in the muscle of his jaw that he was keeping the pain, and to look at him so close, and to be part of the filtering that he was doing in his music. It was an amazing experience, with a bit of, not drama, but we were a bit scared because 2 days before the concert, he decided that it wasn't good to see these 4 singers, one after the other, with a score. He wanted 4 faces, high, looking up and singing without looking at the score. Of course, we were a bit scared because we didn't think to do it by heart, but we did it. And I must say that he was extremely right, because it's so beautiful to see these 4 faces totally involved in the music without being distracted by the score.
This was June 29th of 1985.
Yep.
And Pope John Paul II officiated. If there is an answer to this, please tell me, who had the more powerful aura? Was it Pope John Paul II or Herbert von Karajan?
I don't want to say, but there was no comparison. Karajan, at least at my eyes, he was a god himself, and Wojtyła was, of course, after the problem that he had with when they shot at him, and he was basically weak and not so present. But Karajan was extremely present.
I find very interesting about Karajan, I only met him once very briefly, so I can't claim to have known him in any way, that he was one of the first conductors, musicians in the classical world to be very aware of the power of television, film, and broadcasting, not just from the point of view of transmission, because there has been broadcasting for 100 years, but how it could be used differently, and how the visual component of things was very, very important. It's as if he understood cameras and lighting design in a way that perhaps Leonard Bernstein and other conductors that you've known and I've known just were happy to be on camera and do their work and produce the music. But Karajan brought an extra element to it. What do you have to say about that?
For Karajan, it was amazing to think that he started from a very important beginning. I mean, it was the beginning of the 60s, I mean, or maybe even at the end of the 50s, when this matter of videos or television wasn't so normal to see. And at that time, he already started to think that the best way for his legacy was to put everything, not only on recording, which he did since always, but on video. And he did basically whatever he did in his last part of life, long last part of life, was recorded. And actually, when he died in July 89, he was having at home a reunion with the people of Sony, to whom he was selling the entire legacy. And it happened that he died. He was sick, poor man. And it happened that he died during that important meeting. And I mean, he was more than right, because then everybody did the same, and still. But he was always ahead of his times, and also for us. I mean, there were many, as you mentioned, Bernstein, and I could mention Giulini, Scholti, and many others, amazing, great conductors. But Karajan was the only one that deciding to use a young singer could change his life in a matter of one afternoon, one evening. And it is exactly what happened to me when I jumped in the Don Carlo in '86 at the Easter Festival. I was there because I was doing with him the Bruckner Te Deum and the Coronation Mass that we did just the year before in Rome. And I had the contract of covering King Philip just in case of an emergency. And I never thought for 1 minute that if an emergency would have come, I mean, he would have taken me, because he could just clip his fingers and Gauro, Raimondi, I mean, everybody would have jumped in. And that, for that reason, on the day before there was a pre-general rehearsal, I went because I had to go by contract. I realized that my colleague was pretty sick. And I went back to my hotel and I slept like a log, quiet, without thinking, I repeat for 1 minute, that it should have been my case to jump in the day after in the Generale and Premiere, because at that time there was only Generale and Premiere. The Generale, the audience they were with smoking, with long dresses, the ladies, and of course television, Laserdisc at the time, and whatever. And I was sleeping at 9 o'clock, I remember that morning, and they called me. They said, well, you should come here because we have to look at the video. There are certain positions for the cameras. And the Generale is at 4 and you have to sing. I did. I didn't have even the time to get nervous. or to get scared, because there was no time. I went there, I went to the costume fitting, to the wig fitting. By the way, the wig is still the same that I am using even now. And and then I went to vocalize, to warm up. And 20 minutes before, when I was already dressed, made up and everything, they brought me to the other corner of the theater, to his studio. And he told me, so in this moment, I will give you the cue, but don't look at me because there are the cameras and I don't want to see a singer looking at the conductor. Okay, maestro. And then the aria, you sing it like last time, which was 3 years before when I had my audition with him. And it said a phrase that I never heard again in my life from a conductor. Sing it and I will accompany you.
Wow.
And he did, because I didn't see the staging for 1 minute. I went on stage without having an idea or any rehearsals. I had amazing colleagues, because it was Costa Carreras, Agnes Balsa, Capuccilli, Fiamma Izzo D'Amico, that she was having a brilliant debut as Elisabetta. And the day after, they knew that I was existing, just because I was chosen by him.
And it was Salzburg, which is sort of one of the big places on the musical map, and a place that you and I have worked, not together, but we both worked there a lot through the years. I was supposed to be back there this summer, but we'll see. I don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. And I know it's a special inspiration for you as a place, Salzburg. Oh. One of the things I love about Salzburg, believe it or not, is the silence of Salzburg. That apart from the very high season, it's very possible in this beautiful city to have complete silence. One time, it was Mozart's 250th birthday. It was January 27th. I was working as a broadcaster for the New York Public Radio in Salzburg for the concert that had Thomas Hampson, Renee Fleming, Mitsuko Uchida, Riccardo Muti, Cecilia Bartley, and others. And when I went out in the street, it was completely quiet. It was stunningly beautiful, because when it's silent, then you really hear all kinds of things you could not otherwise hear.
It's a very, very special place. And it was, at that time, it was a dream for a young singer to arrive to Salzburg and to see your poster with your face in the shops, the window shops, on the buses, everywhere, because it was still the high time of the recording companies. And the entire city was full of your face. And you had the proof that you were something at that time, because in Salzburg, only the people that he wanted were performing with amazing productions. I will never forget. Ponel was there every year with many things, and good, amazing years. An enormous privilege.
I want to talk to you about Ponel in a moment, but I want our listeners to know something. In Salzburg, there's a river and there's a bridge, and people put locks on the bridge for memory. And on one side of the bridge is the Herbert von Karajan house, birth house, where he was born. And then you walk past it, you turn left, and there's the wonderful Salzburg Marionette Theater, which is a great treasure a lot of people skip. And you keep going, and you're almost at the Mozarteum. And there's a wonderful outdoor market on Thursdays. And in that outdoor market, in front of the church, is the very best roast chicken I've ever had in the world. And they prepare, the birds meet their end on Wednesday night. And on Thursday morning, they become this magnificent roast chicken. So everyone in Salzburg on Thursday mornings go have a roast chicken before going to a concert. But anyway, Jean-Pierre Ponel. Again, I don't name bests because we have so many influences. I knew him, I worked with him a bit, but my teacher, in effect, was Strehler, and before that, Tito Gobi in terms of production. But Ponel, to me, was a model of the total artist in terms of language, music, aesthetics, visual, emotional aesthetic, if there is such a term as an emotional aesthetic. When he looked at a role, let's say Figaro, he brought immense humanity to the role, but there was nothing artificial to me. I don't know what you thought about Ponel and his work.
Ponel was my second enormous mentor. I mean, and not second. I mean, Karajan and Ponel were the people that really made my life. And with Ponel, I started earlier than Karajan because I did my first Filippo in Kassel, Germany, with Giancarlo Del Monaco directing. He was the intendant at the time there. And it happened that after I did Don Carlo, Giancarlo one day met him somewhere for lunch with Jean-Pierre. And Jean-Pierre was preparing the movie Rigoletto. And Giancarlo spoke about me and he called me and I did it. And I met him in that occasion. And after that, I mean, all my big Mozart at the Champs-Élysées Festival, the Festival Mozart with Barenboim, and in New York, we had a tour one year that the Champs-Élysées was closed because they were working and renewing the theater. We went for 2 months in Israel, and we were in Tel Aviv doing the 3 Da Ponte Mozart, and I was doing Alfonso, Figaro, and Giovanni. And for 9 weeks, I had 2 days off only, but I couldn't even think to complain. It was a dream, a constant dream, like my first Figaro in Paris with him, and my first Susanna was, for the first time in Italian, Katy Battle.
Katy Battle, yeah.
Yeah, and we were working 10, even 11 hours a day. And we were, younger, but we were never tired. We were so taken by this way of working to make these characters live through words, again, and music. And we were blessed, absolutely blessed to be in the hands of this genius.
A question I've always wanted to ask you, I know that some of your role models and great influences, we'll talk about Hans Hodder a bit later. One of my teachers was Tito Gobi, began as a singer. Hans Hodder, of course, did too, but went on to become a wonderful stage director. Hodder directed The Ring, he directed many other things, and Boris Godunov, I believe, and Tito Gobi, many, many things, including not just things like Tosca and Janischi, but Wozzeck. He didn't stick just to the Italian repertoire. He was a wonderful Wozzeck. And so have you ever thought about that for you?
Of course, I would be able to put it together even without being another little Ponel. I mean, but I learned from him, from Karajan, from these amazing people. I really learned how to make these characters live and be alive. But it's another big, different kind of world. It's not just moving people. You have to have a good ensemble, set designer, and I don't know. I don't know. It's something that I still keep there.
Okay. So one of the other inspirations you wrote about, and we're going to get to a larger inspiration than simply Boris Christoph,
Yeah.
is the whole Russian world. My last name is Plotkin. That is a very common surname in St. Petersburg. It means carpenter.
Yeah.
And my grandfather came from near St. Petersburg. They were all woodworkers and carpenters, and hence the name. But people have always said to me, why, Fred, do you have such a strong feeling for Italy and some feeling for Russia and Russian culture, certainly. But my very strong feeling is Italy. And I have a feeling that we were saying before that the Friulians traveled the world working, and a lot of what they did was carpentry. You go to Ontario in Canada, and they're all Friulani, and they all were in the wood business and the carpentry business. We know that most of St. Petersburg was built in 1703 and forward by Italian craftsmen. Carpenters, falegnami, who are metal workers. My mother's surname means falegname. So I really believe that my family came from Italy and went to Russia. And this was the common feeling. Now, I once had the great pleasure, it was really a pleasure to work with Marcello Mastroianni. And he once said to me, I'm an Italian, but I have a Russian soul. And there are many Italians I know who have a very strong feeling for Russian culture, the Russian character, the sentiment. I've had Italians say to me, you think we're emotional, you should look at the Russians. Now, you have played the greatest Russian roles, Boris Godunov, Kovanchi, in a small but important role, Grayman in Eugene Onegin. What is your connection emotionally and culturally to Russia?
You know, when I started my adventure in this particular world, it was with a big recital that Alexis Weissenberg wanted to do with me, based on Rachmaninoff and Mussorgsky leaders and song and dance of death. And I started to study. It is a language that is totally different from Italian. But the big difference between Italian and all the other languages, they are both meant for singing because they are based on vowels. And the consonants are not so strong to cut the line of singing, the famous line of singing of Campogalliani. And it was extremely capturing to do that. And I loved it from the very beginning. And of course, when I had the chance to do my first Boris, it was in Roma, in a gorgeous production of Piero Fagioli. Absolutely stunning, beautiful. And to be for the first time on stage as that amazing character, it was a sensational adventure. And more I started to feel close to that country, to that population, to the Russians. And then I had the luck to be invited by Gergiev after we did the Boris in Milano to do it in St. Petersburg. And that was, I mean, amazing, sensational, amazing to be in this extraordinary city during the White Night Festival, and to breathe, as you were mentioning before, the silence of Salzburg. But in St. Petersburg, there is a special atmosphere that is all connected to music. And I am going to that festival every year since 2004. And it's every year is a discovery, a dream fulfilled. And it's so beautiful to feel the way they are. They had, of course, a very disgraceful period in the last century, which castrated a lot of their spontaneity. But still, when you are there, you are blessed and breathing this amazing atmosphere. Amazing. Then I was even more lucky because 2 years after the Boris in St. Petersburg, I was invited to do it at the Bolshoi. And the Bolshoi was another version, of course, with the Rimsky-Korsakov. In the beautiful production 1948, where they rebuilt the apartment of Boris exactly as they are in the Kremlin, to be there as Boris with this amazing Russian chorus around me. It was not to believe, not to believe.
Russian choral singing is something phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
Also Bulgarian, that part of the world, something about the harmonies are extraordinary. I'm going to have a guest on in a couple of months when we're going to focus on Rachmaninoff, so I'll let you know about that.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime, you raised a point that I wanted to raise with you. Two of your most famous roles are Boris and King Philip II in Don Carlo. Both of those operas do not have definitive versions. There are versions, in the case of Don Carlo, in French, in Italian, a 4-act, a 5-act, with ballet, without ballet, all kinds of different versions. In Boris, often they remove what's called the Polish act in the middle. And the last time I actually saw it was in London in Covent Garden, and it was done as one long act, but without the Polish act. And you as an artist playing these roles, how do you build the momentum, the pace, the characterization of these same characters that you have in your body when the timing, sometimes the musical selections are different? How do you do that? And what choices do you make?
You know, when I started to do Boris, I was extremely well guided by Fagioli. It was a new adventure. And don't forget, there was something dramatic in that production, because originally the conductor should have been one. And then because of some choices that have been done in the administration of the Opera di Roma, they changed the version. So my contract was for the first version, which is 2 hours and 15 minutes. The conductor left, and 10 days before the beginning of rehearsals, they decided to do the Lam, which is 4 hours and a half. I mean, not for Boris, but there is all the room of the children, the monologue with the children, and a lot of stuff, and all in Russian. And I was here in Vienna doing Ponel Italiana, and I was studying an average of 15, 16 hours a day. And 10 days after, when I drove with a friend of mine who was driving the car and I was studying, I arrived in Rome that I knew by heart the Lam. So it was quite a stressing moment, but nevertheless, I never had a moment of regret afterwards, because the monologue is a dream scene. Although after so many years, and having done all this, the 3 most important versions, I probably prefer the first one, because it's the only one which is 100% Mussorgsky. The rest is a bit rounded at the corners, you know? And that version can be done without intermission. And we did it I remember in San Diego. We did it without intermission. It's extremely probably heavy for the audience, not to move for 2 hours or something, but it's a flame that goes up and never ends. It is amazing, absolutely amazing. With King Philip, I mean, it's a long story. My first one, I was a boy, I was 30. He was in Kassel, as I told you, but I always had in front of me my idol, Cesare Siepi. And from the very, I was listening, I was drinking and really absorbing whatever I was receiving by him. Then I had the occasion at that time to go a La Fenice for a Don Carlo. Think about the production. The set and the costume of Pierluigi Pizzi and the direction of Piero Fagioni, and Prêtre conducting, and Ghiaurov singing Philip. And I was in the last place in the Loggione with the ceiling here touching my head. And I went for 3 consecutive times just to be part of it. So little by little, this character really developed. Then I had the chance to do it in Germany with Giancarlo, who is a great director. And then I did it constantly for 36 years.
Yeah.
And I can tell you how in these years and year after year is changing, because it changes with you as a person, as a human being, as a performer, of course. And it's splendid, because even now, sometimes you find colors or intentions of movements or the way of filtering a moment, also scenically, stagingly talking, that I didn't think the year before. And this is amazing. I love it. I love to live every time a new experience.
Last week, I had on the very wonderful young American soprano, Julia Bullock. I don't know if you know her, have worked with her.
No.
She's at the beginning of what will be a brilliant career. And I was telling her about age and experience and the way of those of you who work as performers, people like myself who work in opera, but not as a performer, audiences who live with these works over the course of a life, and how the great roles and the great operas and the great pieces of symphonic and instrumental music live in us and grow and change as we grow and change.
Absolutely.
And I've seen you as a performer. I first saw you in 1979. I didn't meet you for about another 8 or 9 years as friends,
Yep.
but I was watching you before. And so I've seen your growth as an artist and as an interpreter, even more than artist in this case. And I think all of the great artists do that, is that they live with music. Sometimes something is no longer relevant. Sometimes it's no longer physically possible,
Yep.
or believable. But there are many roles that an artist can live with and return to. And sometimes it's actually easier later on because they've figured things out technically, but also have had life experience that opens windows and doors into the characters and the music that didn't happen before.
It's amazing to see how roles, extremely demanding roles, are growing and becoming, as you said, easier. Instead of facing difficulties, let's say, no. I remember the first time I sang Attila, for instance, I was sweating blood because it's you have the aria that is for a bass and the cabaletta is for a baritone, and you love it and you love to be caught by this. But it was, oh my God, it was hard. It was all the many. I mean, I sang Zaccaria in Nabucco at least for 31 years. And it was the only role that at the end it was making me a bit tired, because it, again, aria for bass and cabaletta of baritone. But it's amazing how in the years and through the repertoire that I did, Mozart, the use of words, and to make everything not lighter, because it's not correct to say that it's lighter, but clear. To use the word in the same way you would use it in Don Giovanni or in Figaro, you can use it in Boris Godunov, or in King Philip, or in Attila. And the last Attila that I did was 4 years ago in San Francisco. It was easy. It was easy. It's a demanding piece, but it was much, much easier. And I repeat, it is because of what you did before. And the way,
yes.
And the way
I'm
you
going to tell our listeners, I'm sorry, Ferruccio, go ahead.
No, in the way you grew up doing the right thing for your voice.
Yeah. I'm going to tell our listeners the story of Attila, about the opera, because it's very particular. It was Verdi's 7th opera. It premiered at Teatro La Fenice in Venice in 1846, and that's very important. At that time, Austria had dominated, much of Friuli had dominated the Veneto, had occupied Venice, and the Venetians were not happy. And it was in 1846 that the Austrians completed the construction of the railway bridge that goes from Mestra and the mainland to the old city of Venice. And they destroyed part of the old city of Venice to build the railway station that's still there. And the Venetians were furious. To them, it was an invasion. It was a destruction of La Serenissima and the fact that it was not physically connected to the mainland. So Verdi, along with Piave, decided to tell the story of Attila the Hun, who invaded Aquileia, Aquileia being in Friuli. Aquileia, when it was destroyed by Attila, the people of Aquileia moved to 118 islands in the lagoon of what became Venice, and created Fenice, the phoenix that rose from the ashes of Aquileia. So it had an incredibly powerful meaning for the Venetians to have an opera about Attila, who was being vanquished by the Italian peoples, namely the general Ezio. Yep. And my favorite line in all of Verdi is Ezio's line, which is "Avrai tu l'universo, resti l'Italia a me." In other words, you can have the universe, let Italy be mine. That's going to be on my tombstone, by the way, but no time soon. But so when Venetians saw that opera, and still see that opera, it has extra meaning because of everything that Piave, the librettist, but especially Verdi, the composer, put into it. And you, as a man from that part of the world, did you connect to that aspect of the character, even though Attila is the bad guy?
Well, but you go in the case of Attila, again, you go through the words that he's saying, and you're living that. There is no specific indication about this in Attila. The indication, of course, is with the meeting of the Pope, all this historical thing that happened, but not in that way. No, I wouldn't say.
Let me ask you about Hans Hotter, because one of the recommendations you gave was a recording on Adagio, The Art of Hans Hotter, who was he described himself as a bass baritone. He was German. He grew up in Munich. He was not born there. He was born in 1909 and died in 2003. He had a very long career. He was very famous for his Wagner, especially his Wotan. James Morris is a magnificent Wotan. Hans Hotter taught Wotan to James Morris. He sang Falstaff in Italian and the Grand Inquisitor from Don Carlo. Exactly. He sang Don Basilio and Boris Godunov in German. He was of an era when a lot of the operas he did, no matter what the character, were sung in the native language, namely German.
Yeah.
What is it about Hodder that's special to you?
Yeah, I met Ansotter as a singer when I started to think, to do Winterreise. And so I started to listen to all the greatest, or the most famous at least. And when I came to him, to that recording, it's a very specific recording done in Berlin in 1943. Can you imagine the state of mind that somebody could have had in Berlin in 1943 and singing Winterreise? And I was caught the way this man was coloring, filtering, with this amazing voice, because as you mentioned, he could do baritone roles and then be the inquisitor with a mi grave. And then I started to listen to many other things. I am doing, for instance, the Vier Erste Gesänge Brahms, and whatever he does is the perfection, is the greatest inspiration I could have had going into that field. And in general, loving him in whatever he did, even not here in Vienna in '64 with Karajan, he did The Murder in the Cathedral in German. And there is a recording of that. And even that was stunning to think that that opera, composed only 6 years before, was chosen by Karajan, sang sensationally by Ansotter in this theater, and they never ever did it again. This makes me suffer a bit, but it's a joy. It's a great joy to listen to one of my favorite operas and role done by these two monsters.
Listeners should know that obviously I adore opera and I adore all of this music, and I adore almost all of the people who make it. But there are very few artists where I fly to hear them perform, especially if it's a role I haven't heard them do before. Carita Matil is one of them. Ferruccio Leone Rieseneck was definitely one of them, and Ferruccio Furlanetto was another. So I had the pleasure to hear you in San Diego in Murder in the Cathedral. I had the great pleasure to hear you in Toronto in Don Quichotte by Massenet. And that everybody needs to hear Ferruccio Furlanetto sing Don Quichotte by Massenet. I won't say it's my favorite role of yours, but it is the greatest night in the theater for me is to hear you do that.
Since I started to do it, it was 2002, I think, in Nice. And after that, we did the new production in St. Petersburg, which is still on, we are still doing it. And I did it everywhere, even in Australia, where they never even heard it. And it was never done in the Sydney Opera, never. And I must say that in this moment of my life, as a person, as a human being, as a performer, I mean, there are amazing roles I repeat, like Boris, like Filippo, like Thomas Becket. But Don Quixote is the closest to my heart. The finale of the opera is something that, first of all, like very few other things in this profession, first of all, you sing for yourself. And you can be sure that it reaches the heart of the people because you will be 100% honest. It's a dream. I would never, ever say no to that role. I would go wherever. I mean, I went, Australia is pretty far, but it's a dream. And in Toronto, the one you mentioned, it was even more special because for the first time and only, I had a real horse, and I fell in love with that horse. It was named, the name was Gold. It was black, but it was gold, and it was the sweetest animal. At the end of the last performance, I hugged this big head. And it was probably like Quichotte would have done with his own.
Yeah. What's wonderful among many things in opera is when you did that Don Quixote, you worked with two young artists who were not yet well known. The woman was a mezzo named Anita Rakvelishvili, now one of the greatest stars in opera. And the baritone, the Sancho Panza, was our friend, the wonderful baritone Quinn Kelsey, who you referred to me as my baby.
Yeah.
These two are really magnificent artists, and they were at the very beginnings of their careers when you worked with them. Did you see in them what they would become?
Oh yes, from the very beginning. Because when I met Anita, she was in 2009 doing one of the two corifee in Assassinio nella Cattedrale. Beautiful production of Yanis Kokos, gorgeous, and she was impressive. When I met her again in that Don Quixote, I heard the Dulcinea of the dreams. She was absolutely splendid, and of course it was quite easy to imagine what kind of career she could have had. And Quinn, I met him in San Francisco in that Attila that we were talking before, and he was doing Ezio for the first time. And from the moment in a musical rehearsal in a room with Luisotti, in the moment this boy opened its mouth, and, but then the Verdi baritone are still existing. And he was splendid. And from that moment, yes, I always thought of him as my boy, because it was having his first important role, I think, in that occasion. And he did it magnificently, as he did splendid Sancho. Absolutely.
I want to get back to Hans Hodder, and then I have one final comment. Yeah. Hans Hodder, I only met him once, and I had a chance to converse with him in front of an audience. And he was a very humorous man. I didn't expect that, but he had a very good sense of humor, spoke excellent English. And he told me that his favorite night performing at the Met was in 1952, where he sang Johannahan in Salome opposite Lyuba Velic, and conducted by Fritz Reiner. And he said, but that was only the second half of the program. At that time, the Met did Johnny Schicchi with Salvatore Baccalone before the intermission and Salome after, which I cannot picture, but I would happily see Johnny Schicchi and Salome together.
Amazing.
And the other was, he loved England, and he was very anti-Nazi, and he remained in Germany because he was told that he would be separated from his family if he left, and that his family might suffer. But he was friends with Richard Strauss. His daughter married Strauss's, I forget, son and granddaughter. There was a marriage in the Strauss and the Hodder family. And he said, when I finally got to go to London after the war, it was a summer day, and I picked up a copy of the Evening Standard, and it said, Hodder in London. I didn't realize it was about the weather.
Beautiful. That's amazing.
Finally, I want to pay you, I hope this is a compliment. Among the many things in watching you now for 40 years, I've come to the decision that you and one other artist, Montserrat Caballé, have something in common. You have many things in common, but you have the best use of hands in opera. And I've been watching you now for an hour, and your hands are incredibly expressive. And I don't think you do it consciously. I think it's just a natural extension of who you are as a man, what you feel, but
there is a
also
story
each
also.
character. Yeah.
There is also a story behind this. And it was a stage director, still alive, I think he's way over 90, Giulio Chazalet.
Sure.
Lo conosci?
Yeah.
And I was doing in Trieste, I think it was 77, more or less 76, 77. Arianna Barbablu, Paul Dukas. And of course, Barbablu is the only male character in the opera. And I remember that Giulio told me, you don't know the importance of the hands. The hands can speak louder than words. The hands can become a character that's small, enormous. And he showed me the way, and I started in that moment to understand the importance of these appendixes that we have, and especially in characters where the acting is important, like in Philip Boris of Don Quixote. You can paint a lot with the hands. And at the beginning, of course, not in the performance, but in the preparation, I was thinking to use a certain movement in that specific moment. But then it became the most natural consequence, let's say, of this starting. And I love to use the hands. I love, and I think I repeat, I mean, Chazalet was extremely right when he said you can really make a small role become huge just with the use of the hands.
In talking about Caballé, I'll just give two of many, many examples. Did you ever sing with her?
Yeah.
Okay, and what, for example? I don't know this.
My second year of career in Aix-en-Provence, I was singing Walter Raleigh in the
by Donizetti, right?
Donizetti, yes.
Yeah, we'll think of it after.
Yes, I never sang it again after that.
Not Emilia di Liverpool.
Roberto Doro.
Roberto Dever, okay.
With her and young Jose Carreras was 1977, summer 77. And she had big problems with her legs, with veins or something. And she sang basically all the performance on the throne. And she was huge. Huge because, I mean, that voice, that voice, and the way she was the queen. And then here in Vienna, I will never forget, I was 89, and with Claudio Bado, we did the Viaggio a Reims.
Yeah.
The Ronconi Viaggio a Reims, and she was the lady owner of the Osteria, the Trattoria, and she was to die.
Funny.
Oh, she was so comic, so amazing, splendid.
I worked on that production in 1984 in Pesaro.
In Pesaro?
Yeah, when it was Katja Ricciarelli in that role.
A dream.
Abbado conduct. I was invited by Abbado.
A dream production.
A brilliant production. Were you Sydney? Did you play Lord Sydney? Okay. Two examples of Montserrat Caballé's hands that our visitors can look at. One is the end of Andrea Chenier. Pick whatever version you like. I like the Jose Carreras version. The way they knew that they were going to have their heads cut off with the guillotine, the expression in her hands about her willingness, her acceptance of love, her acceptance of her fate, Viva la morte insieme, was all expressed with her hands. It's an astonishing thing. And the other is her second act of Tosca. She did not move around the stage like a lot of Toscas. And at the moment when she discovers the knife, most singers sort of go like that, like, oh, there's the knife. She decided that before the knife, she would have to give in to Scarpia. So like a lady, she was not going to have sex with him with her earrings on. She took off her earrings and looked at them. And as she lowered the earrings, the music cued the knife. And rather than go like that, she put the earrings down, gathered the knife, and then turned Tosca finalmente mia. Ah! But she did not overact, but it was absolutely accurate. It was dramatically logical. It was logical for her as a woman, as a large person as well, but not even about her size, about her character as a woman. And you do that too, with your hand, with everything.
I think that they are so important.
Yeah.
Really, also not necessarily apply to your singing, but for the character. For the character that you are performing, they are a fundamental way of painting.
Yeah.
Fundamental, whatever.
Well, carissimo Ferruccio.
Carissimo.
Listeners now know that you and I are very close friends. I am thrilled to see you from New York to Vienna. I wish you well. I encourage listeners to, there are 39 different Ferruccio Furlanetto recordings on IDAGIO. So just go and listen to all of those, and then Hans Hodder and Mussorgsky and Herbert von Karajan and so on. And I'm going to have an illustrious guest next week as well, who I don't know personally, and I'm just negotiating to have him join us. And when that's official, I will announce it. And in the meantime, stammi bene, mandi, as the Friulians say, mandi meaning in the hand of God.
Yeah.
So, eccolo. Thank you, Ferruccio.
Grande abbraccio, Fred.
Anche a te.